Hello, friends. Today's guest on the podcast is Bill Ramsey. Bill is a professor of philosophy at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and at 59 years old, he is still climbing 514 while balancing a full-time career. We talked about his recent ascent of Jumbo Pumping Hate, his most recent 514 up at Clark Mountain. We got pretty deep into his training and why he thinks the treadwall is one of the most underutilized training tools for route climbers. We also talked about building and training on replicas and how Bill used replicas and made his own holds specifically for Jumbo Pumping Hate. We also talked about his fingerboarding routine and why he still does fingertip pullups, as well as finger ups, which is an exercise he describes in the interview. We talked about his coffee addiction, his two-part climbing career, which included early development at Smith Rock and the Red River Gorge, favorite articles he's written, and the crossover he's noticed between philosophy and rock climbing. Bill mentions Alan several times in this interview, and he's referring to Alan Watts. If you like this interview, I highly recommend you check out the interview I did with Alan in episode 4 of the podcast. It's one of my favorites, and I think many of you will like it, and I think you'll like this one. Bill's awesome to talk to, and I learned a lot. Please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Bill Ramsey.
Cause, no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
Okay, we're just doing sound check. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I did not eat breakfast.
Okay.
More like Alan.
Yeah, more like Alan.
I don't fast one day on and one day off, but I do often have just kind of one big meal a day.
Okay.
Kind of snack a little bit during the day.
How long have you been doing that?
You know, you realize that your metabolism really slows down as you get older.
Uh-huh.
And I just couldn't keep the weight off that I wanted to keep off by eating normally. Certainly couldn't do it eating 3 meals a day. But I like having a big meal, and so I'm just like, okay, I'll just have one meal. And I don't really get hungry typically during the middle of the day. I mean, again, as I kind of snack a little bit.
Yeah.
That's fine, and I can usually stay fine through the day. I don't feel lightheaded or weak or anything. I feel like if I eat a big enough meal, I'm still digesting it for most of the next day.
Huh.
And so I can totally see what Alan was talking about one day on, one day off, because, yeah, if you quite a bit, you're going to be digesting that for a while. The metabolism is not burning that fast. I don't have a repair team working on making muscles bigger. That's not happening.
Do you change your approach to eating on climbing days or training days?
What I usually try to do is the night before, I'll eat a light meal, and usually it'll be kind of carb intensive.
Okay.
So whole grains like wheat, pasta, rice, something like that.
Uh-huh.
Mix in with some meat, chicken, something along those lines. And then after a big training day or a big climbing day, then I'll try to have a little more protein intensive.
Okay.
Fish, chicken, occasionally red meat.
Yeah, I re-listened to an episode that you did with Neely.
Right,
Training
exactly,
Beta, and you
yeah.
mentioned that every once in a while you had a big steak and you felt like that.
Yeah, there's something about the red meat and the steak. I don't know if it's the iron in it or something, but sometimes it seems like I can tell the next day.
Huh.
I feel like I'm just got a little bit more energy.
Okay.
May all be placebo, but...
So you're kind of known for these legendary massive training days that you do?
Yeah.
How do you fuel on a day like that?
Well, I'll fuel throughout the day. Generally, when I'm climbing and I'm doing a big training day, I sort of try to get my calories through liquid because I feel like it's easier to digest. So I'll make up a protein shake, but often put in some carbohydrates too.
Okay.
So I'm kind of getting quite a few calories just through various drinks.
Okay.
And that's usually pretty filling. And so but I don't like climbing and I don't like training feeling full. I like feeling pretty light. So I'll just kind of be taking little bits of it throughout the day, basically. And that usually seems to work pretty well.
Gotcha. Are you still doing some of those days where you start at 5 in the morning and end at 9 p.m.?
Yes and no. I mean, that maybe is a little extreme. Those are kind of rare and few and far between. But it's kind of like what Alan was saying. I find that it takes so long for me to recover now that it sort of makes sense just to try to pack everything. I mean, it also takes a long time to warm up and get ready to go. So I find it much better as you get older to do bigger training days and then take more rest days than it does to try to fit in 3 or 4 training days that are shorter. I don't feel like I recover in 24 hours.
Even if
it's a short session, I
Okay.
don't feel like I really recover fully.
Huh.
And I really feel like I need that time off. But I still want to have a pretty good workout in, and I can go pretty big. And so I do that. I mean, originally, the way it started was I'm a bit obsessive about these things. And so I'd have my routine, and then I'd hear about something new that somebody had just developed, like, oh, system training. This sounds like a great idea. Or campusing, I mean, there was once a time when I can remember when things like campusing came into existence. Okay. And so I am thinking, oh, I need to add that in, but I don't want to subtract anything. It's kind of like how some science and engineering programs, they get new information, but they just keep building up the curriculum, building up the requirements instead of replacing things. And that's kind of how I was. I didn't want to replace anything I was already doing. So I'm like, okay, I'll just add that on. And, so that's another hour or so. And then it's like, oh, I'll add that on. And after a while, it seems like these days were getting really huge. And I kind of developed this when I was climbing at the Red, and I felt like I needed a couple days off to climb on Saturday. So my schedule would be I'd train pretty hard Tuesday night, and that would mostly consist of power.
When was this? This is when you were
This
at
is probably
Dame?
this is when I was at Notre Dame. This was in the early 90s, like
Okay.
early and mid 90s, all the way through like maybe 2007. So I'd train pretty hard on Tuesday evenings, focusing more on power, fingerboarding, bouldering. I had by this time bought a house and built a climbing gym in the attic of the house. I would do some campusing and a few other strength-oriented things, and that session would probably last, 4 or 5 hours that evening. And then the next day I wanted it to be more endurance-oriented. Notre Dame had a treadwall that I'd encourage them to purchase.
Okay.
And so I would have this whole big program I did the next day, Wednesday, on the treadwell, and that session would probably go from like 8 o'clock until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I do some weightlifting then, and then I would just take Thursday and Friday off. And I felt like that program worked pretty well. Once I moved out here, I didn't have to climb only on the weekends. So I thought, well, then what I could do is I could just combine those morning sessions into one big day.
Okay.
And that's sort of how I did it.
Okay.
So as I told somebody, I believe in the periodized training. I just do it all in one day.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we'll start out with morning sessions, power oriented, and then maybe a little power endurance in the middle, and then some more, our stamina training endurance in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And, that's not for everybody. And I would say probably the scientific evidence suggests that it's not the best way to go. But I do think someone should keep it in mind as something to just try every now and then, just to kind of shock the body a little bit.
Okay.
Get it out of a routine and kind of push a little bit harder. One advantage to it that I've noticed is your body develops that kind of stamina where you can go all day.
Yeah, I've heard you mention that you're more likely to climb something on your fourth or fifth try of the day than a lot of your peers.
Than a lot of my peers. I wouldn't say I'm more likely to do it on my fourth or fifth try, but I have noticed that I'm still performing towards the end of the day. Like I still have a shot at doing something.
Okay.
Whereas other people, they're maybe in their fourth hour of climbing, they're kind of done.
Yeah.
They're okay, now we're going to back off and do easier things.
Yeah.
So if I'm projecting, it's kind of nice to have that one extra burn on where you can actually, have a shot at doing something.
Yeah.
I think when I was getting towards the end of doing jumbo pumping hate, I was giving it 3 burns a day, and I was doing pretty good on my third burn.
And that's a 14 epic Clark.
Yeah, that's a 14 epic Clark, and it's a huge route.
Yeah.
It's really taxing, and just getting up there is kind of an epic too.
Right.
So those are big days. But I felt like I had gotten my overall body fit enough to be able to handle that kind of stamina that you need for that day like that, and it was a bit of an advantage. So, especially I think as people get older, you need more rest days. I think it's not a bad idea to have a day and also it just happens to work out well with my career. I feel like it's harder for me to have days where I'm climbing part of the day and then I'm working part of the day. I can do that, but generally I feel like, no, this chunk of time I'm just going to focus on training, and then the next day I'm just going to focus on working, and it just seems to work better that way.
Okay. So we just kind of rolled right into it, but there's a few things I want to go back to actually.
Okay.
The first one actually is coffee.
Yeah.
I know that's a very important part of your day-to-day routine.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious.
How do you make your coffee?
That's pretty funny. I don't know if I told you this, but I used to have a coffee maker down here. I'd have it timed and everything, and but damn, that required getting up out of bed and walking down the stairs. That's a lot of work early in the morning.
IV drip now?
Well, it's close. I just have a coffee maker right next to my bed, and I just I can get up enough strength to roll over and turn it on.
That sounds like an amazing way to wake up.
Yeah, it
Just
is.
the aroma.
And I can just lay there, okay, now I can get the cup out, and
Nice.
it works pretty well. It's been really creepy and weird, though. It's an automated coffee maker, and it does have a clock on it, but I haven't set it up. But the last, couple weeks, there have been mornings where it just comes on automatically at about the right time.
Oh, my gosh.
It's bizarre. Yeah, I don't know if there's a ghost there, what the hell's going on, but
It's Siri.
but no, it's that. Okay, I can lay there in bed, have a couple cups of coffee, pull over my laptop, check what's going on to see if the world's come to an end or anything, and then I'm like, okay, I think I can get out of bed now after a couple of cups of coffee.
Is that pretty common? Do you have your first couple cups in bed?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And are you reading the news?
I'm reading the news. I'm
Okay.
usually going online. I've got my websites that I go to just to kind of
Okay.
check. I mean, it's so nice having a laptop. You don't have to get out of bed to start working.
Uh-huh.
You just pull it over and you just start working and you start checking out what's going on. And
Yeah.
it works pretty well.
Nice. Is that usually a positive way to start the day, or is that ever a trap?
Who knows? I mean, I generally feel pretty comfortable getting out of bed eventually. Maybe there'll become a point where it just is like, I don't really need to get out of bed at all. But in general, oftentimes,
Let's try again tomorrow.
Oftentimes after a couple of cups of coffee, I have to go to the bathroom, and so that gets me going pretty good. So probably more information than you need there.
Nice.
But I think that works pretty well.
Nice. Okay, so the next thing you're talking about, this kind of slowly evolving training, this massive training regimen that you had. Would you ever go back and change that, or do you think that worked well for you to keep adding things?
I think it worked well for me.
Okay.
I mean, I have this kind of two-stage climbing career.
Right.
So I started climbing in the 70s with Alan, and we didn't really know much about training then. We didn't really understand things. I mean, we understood that, it'd be really helpful to not get pumped and not fall off and have stronger fingers.
Uh-huh.
But how to get fit for those things, we really weren't that knowledgeable.
Okay.
It wasn't until Dale Goddard's book came out, and I don't know when that was exactly, Performance Rock Climbing.
Yeah, I'll link to that one in the show
people
notes.
actually were putting some real effort into figuring out how to train for rock climbing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd always liked the idea of training for climbing. I'd been an athlete in high school, and I'd done some sort of self-coaching in high school. We had this thing called the Marine Corps Physical Fitness Test.
Yeah.
And I was actually pretty good at that. I think I had the highest score in the country my senior year.
Huh.
And that was all a matter of self-coaching, 'cause
What drew you to that?
I was good at it.
Okay.
I mean, I hated it, actually.
Really?
It was just drudgery. Yeah.
Were you just competitive?
I was really competitive,
Yeah.
and it was part of our PE class in freshman year. But our high school had always done pretty well on this thing. There were these statewide competitions, and for the little tiny town of Madras, we would kick butt on those Portland big schools, and it was something we were proud of. So there was a kind of history of it at our high school.
Is
and
there
my
like
freshman
a
year,
plaque of you?
What's that?
Is there like a plaque or a statue?
There
of
actually
you?
is, yeah. There's
Right on.
something there, yeah.
It's awesome.
I was pretty good at it. I could tell I could do more pull-ups than most people. I could do more push-ups. And so I just kept working on it. I was on the team. And then by the time my senior year was around, I had the best score of anybody I'd ever had, I think. Certainly from our high school. And it turned out I think that was the best score in the country that year.
Wow.
It was an intense thing. It was 100 sit-ups. You had 2 minutes to do 100 sit-ups, and it had to be perfect. Like the Marine Corps was counting. And if you were not doing it perfect, like 39, 39, 39, you want to just punch the guy. It's so annoying. But he wouldn't tell you what you were doing wrong.
Okay.
So you'd wind up usually doing about 105 sit-ups in 2 minutes. Then you had a 2-minute rest. Then you had to do 60 push-ups, 2-minute rest. Then you had to do 30 pull-ups, 2-minute rest.
Oh my gosh.
Standing broad jump, for 100 points there, you had to have standing broad jump 9 feet 10 inches.
Whoa.
Which is quite a ways. And then the final another 2-minute rest. The final thing was this 300-yard shuttle run. Or maybe it was a 100-yard shuttle run. I can't remember.
Okay.
But, it was hard. I threw up, I think, every time after I did it. But I was pretty good at it, and I realized I could get better at it by training, so I started training myself for that. And part of what really kind of attracted me to climbing was, I like that process. I like going through that process of being kind of a self-motivating coach. But I knew I was going to be leaving high school athletics, and I was not good enough at anything to do anything at the college level. So I wanted there to be an activity that I could continue pursuing, and that was part of what attracted me to climbing. But the problem was we just didn't know how to train for climbing. So then, second part of my career, when I'm at Notre Dame, all this new information is out there about how to train for climbing, and I'm really missing it. I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't left climbing. This is so cool, what everybody's coming up with now. You can build your own climbing gym. There's all these new techniques. And that's when I started figuring out that I could get back into it. And that's when I started developing this big day. And so, like I said, I bought a house that I knew I could build a climbing gym in, had a huge attic. And I built a campus board. I put up all sorts of fingerboards and things like that. And just started getting back into it. And by that time, I had discovered the red. And that just fueled my desire to really go full-blown back into it.
Yeah, you quickly climbed through all the routes there. You ended up developing Transworld Depravity in Omaha Beach.
Yeah.
Were those the first, was Transworld the first 14A in the red?
No, I think David Hume had done some things. First off, it's probably about 92. I had been doing a little bit of climbing in southern Illinois.
Okay.
There's actually a really cool area down there called Jackson Falls, and the climbs are really good. They're just kind of short.
Huh.
So I do occasional trips down there. So I was doing a little bit of climbing, and then a good climbing friend of mine, another philosophy professor named Steve Downs, who teaches up at the University of Utah, he had a postdoc at the University of Cincinnati. And I think it was a postdoc, he may have been a position there. But anyhow, he invited me to meet him at the New River Gorge. And that's where I went down in probably May of 92 or 91 or something like that. And that's when I met Porter Gerard and Doug Reed.
Okay.
We were all kind of staying in this big house. And Porter started telling me about this place he was developing in Kentucky. And I was just kind of skeptical. I'm like, climbing in Kentucky,
right?
Okay, horse racing, yes. Bourbon, yes.
No mountains.
Rock climbing, what's the deal? But I'd been exposed to that sandstone in southern Illinois, so I thought that's intriguing. So I was kind of getting back into it. I also realized that I didn't need to spend my summers in South Bend, and so I decided I wanted to start spending my summers in Bend, Oregon, so I'd be closer to my family, closer to friends, and able to climb at Smith.
And where is South Bend, just to make it really
South
clear?
Bend is in northern Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about 100 miles out of Chicago.
Got it.
You know, the summers are really humid there. It's kind of gross, and I couldn't climb. So I was like, I'll just start going to Smith's. So I started having the opportunity to go climbing more, and then I took a trip down to the Red, and I was just, oh my God, these walls are amazing. I was completely blown away.
Yeah.
And that then really fueled the passion even more. So I really started getting back into training. My original goal was to get to where I could climb a 513 because I'd never really led a 513. And there was this new thing called sport climbing that was going on. So I didn't have to worry about dying, placing gear, or anything like that. You just clip these bolts. It's like climbing's changed so much for the better nowadays. So I was really getting back into it. And it seemed like it was pretty quick, and I kind of worked up through the grades. I think my first 514 I climbed was Badman.
Oh, right.
I did that in the summer of 1998. And so about 3, 4, 5 years, I was able to climb a 514. And then I really loved the Mother Lode. I love that area at the Red. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a pretty incredible cliff.
Just one brief trip.
Yeah.
I'd love to go back.
And at that time, people were working on things in the Madness Cave. And a good friend of mine, showing just tremendous generosity, Chris Martin, had been working a project that went about 2/3 the way up the wall in the middle, right at the middle of the Madness Cave. It's just a beautiful, beautiful line. And we were playing around one day, and I got on it, and we kind of figured out that it would actually go to the top. So he said, you know what, I'll never do that. I'm going to put in another anchor at the top, put in one more bolt between the old anchor and the top.
Okay.
And you know what, you guys, you have at it. And so I started working on that, and I did it, and that wound up being Omaha Beach.
Cool.
And there's a really fascinating history with that route and what Katie Brown did on it and everything we can talk about later. But that was really only 13D at that time.
Okay.
But I'd done some other things. I think I did Transworld Depravity, I believe, in the spring of 2001. But by that time, I think that David Hume had climbed maybe a couple, 3. I know he'd done Thanatopsis by then.
Okay.
And the way he
So
did it
14B?
too. Yeah, I guess. But I mean, if you saw how he did it, it was probably more like 14C.
Okay.
He did that just before he did Just Do It in 4 tries.
Got you.
Yeah.
And that one's kind of atypical for the Red, right? It's a little bit.
It's really crimpy.
Yeah, really crimpy, not quite as
I
steep
think
as everything else.
since he's done it, people have found a better line, maybe a more natural way to climb it.
Got it.
And it's still really hard. And probably things have broken off too, so it probably evens out. But there had been 514s that had been done there.
Okay.
But I did Omaha Beach, Transworld Depravity, and then an extension of Bohica, and that was really pretty damn cool to be involved in that development there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I did some things over at the Dark Side and the Gold Coast and some other places as well.
Okay.
So I feel really, really fortunate and really lucky to have at least played a small role in the development of what is now probably one of the most important climbing areas in the world.
Totally.
And I feel actually kind of lucky that I've had this experience where I've kind of been involved in the primordial stages of two major areas, like Smith Rock in the 70s and then the Red River Gorge in the 90s.
So I'd love to jump back to that, actually, because I just did an interview with Alan Watts.
Sure,
You guys are
awesome
born-
interview.
You're born thank you. You're born the same day in the
Same day, same
little
hospital. He keeps reminding me he's 6 hours older than me. I'm like, whatever.
Well, that was cool when you guys were in your 20s. Now it's probably reversed, right? Okay, I'm younger.
Yeah, right. I'm younger than you, buddy. Yeah, exactly.
But I find it really interesting. I mean, you were talking about your kind of double climbing career. You were telling me a story. We were just hanging out the other night, and you were telling me a story about you had listened to Alan's interview, and you guys had climbed together. You went to U of O together, and you're climbing at the columns. And then you go off to do your doctorate at UCSD.
Yeah.
And Alan said that you were feeling sorry for him.
Yeah, I think I remember.
Different language.
Well, I think.
Do you remember what you actually told him?
I don't. Probably shouldn't say it on public. But I do remember telling him basically. And it was really interesting at the time because you got to realize at that time, we're talking the early 80s, it was still the case that crack climbing dominated everything because California dominated everything.
Yeah.
And Yosemite was at the center of the world, basically, for climbing, at least in America, and certainly on the West. So everything was crack climbing. And there's crack climbing at Smith, but it was running out.
Yeah, it was just getting nasty.
And it was getting worse and worse, and the stuff that was left was not very good. And so we all kind of moved away. I think that Chris Jones and Alan Lester moved to Colorado. I really liked some of the crack climbing on the granite in Southern California, and I knew that UCSD had a program that I was interested in, so I moved there. And I remember kind of talking to him once, and I was saying something to the effect of, Alan, it's just so sad that you're just going to kind of waste away here. You're such a talented climber, and you're just going to be stuck in this backwoods climbing area that's basically sort of run its course. And I often tell people that's the wrongest I've ever been about anything. I could not have been more wrong. So he had the vision and the insight, but I think a lot of it, quite frankly, was just motivated by a true love for that area. Alan was really interesting in that. I think at that time people were pretty competitive, and Alan was competitive too, which is why he got so good. But I kind of think, looking back now, I would say so much of his agenda was less about promoting himself and becoming the top climber and more about making Smith Rock this really special place. And I just know that, like, when he bolted to Bolt, he was thinking not necessarily that he was going to do it, but he was thinking, man, wouldn't it be awesome if the country's first 514 was here? Wouldn't it be awesome if all these really hard routes were here? And so I really feel like his main agenda was promoting that area. It was promoting Smith.
Yeah.
And he succeeded tremendously.
Yeah.
Beyond his wildest dreams, I'm sure.
It sounds like you were kind of the impetus to go to U of O because the climbing was there.
Yeah,
So
I had gone down and visited. My sister was at U of O, and I'd kind of already made up my mind I was going to go there. And I'd heard there was this little climbing area in the center of town, and one of my sister's friends took me there, and these were awesome cracks.
Yeah.
They were just amazing.
This is the columns.
This is at the columns
NEG.
there, and you could go there and you could top rope. And so I came back and I told Alan about it. And I think Alan was thinking he wanted to go to college, but he wasn't sure where. He wasn't sure if he was going to go to COCC or what he was going to do. And I told him, man, there's this incredible climbing area right in downtown. It's basically, you could ride a bike there from school. And he was really intrigued. And so, of course, the very first day we were there, we went there. And he was loving it. And at that time, I remember Chris Jones. I had not met Chris Jones, but he had legendary status.
Oh, really? Already?
Yeah, already. He had done some things at Smith's and Boulder Problems that were just phenomenally hard. And then we would see this chalk on some of these things at the columns, and we were like, what's up with this? And like everybody be, oh yeah, that's Jones. Jones did that. And he was in Yosemite at that time, and so we were kind of like, he had this whole mystique about him. And plus, he'd survived a 150-foot ground fall in Yosemite.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you told me this story.
Yeah, he fell off the top of Maple Jam, and it's probably about 150 feet, and basically came away from it with like a chipped heel and a concussion, and maybe a compressed vertebrae, and that was it. I mean, it's if you went to the top of this cliff, I did this climb a few years ago, and you get to the top and you look down and you think about falling, free falling all that way, you're like, there's absolutely no way anybody's surviving that.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of this mythical being, and then when he showed up, and he's, of course, this incredibly sweet person. Chris is just like the nicest human being you'll ever meet. Really, really interesting. He always wants to debate physics and things like that and philosophy. So he's really, really a good friend, and we're still good friends.
Cool.
But He was talking about doing these things on the columns that had a contrivance rating. I don't know if Alan told you about that. It was C1 to C4.
No.
About what level of contrivance it was. And C1 was like, well, you had to avoid these holds that are kind of obvious, but it wasn't too bad. Whereas for a C4 contrivance rating, you were fighting gravity. Like if you're lie backing something and gravity's trying to push you against the wall, you're not allowed to touch the wall. So half the effort is trying to fight, touching something that's almost impossible not to touch. That was the most contrivance. But of course we had to do that because in a very short period of time, Alan had climbed everything that was there. And so now we're starting to contrive things. Okay, you got to do it without these holds.
Yeah.
Or you got to do it one-handed.
Was it just him that had?
He was mostly him.
Okay.
I was doing a little bit of it. I did more after he left. I kind of got more back into climbing at the columns. But I was focusing on my classes, and he was going there basically every day.
Yeah.
And if you saw some of these things that he did there, especially his one-handed ascents on the column faces, where he's just using one face and he's standing. Then we're using EBs, right? These are like terrible shoes, but he's basically standing on things about the size of, pencil lead. And he's moving up this thing with only using one hand. And I'm just like, what on earth? That's by far some of the hardest climbing he ever did.
Like dead pointing.
Yeah, like dead pointing.
Pin scars and
sometimes
jams
dead
and
pointing to
stuff?
pin scars, sometimes pinching things and grabbing things. And
It's amazing.
It was really amazing. And when he talks about getting good there, what he got really good at is footwork. His footwork was phenomenal. And so he could just stand on things and put full weight on, basically.
Yeah.
Because he developed all that skill set doing these one-handed ascents at the columns.
Wow.
But yeah, it basically was our climbing gym, but it was fixed. There was no changing things. So the only way you could mix it up and do something new was by eliminating holds, eliminating hands, things like that.
Yeah.
So it still was really a fun place to hang out and go climbing.
Yeah.
And there was a guidebook that I think Chris had for a while. And I think, for this little tiny area, there are over 300 routes.
Oh,
maybe,
wow.
400 routes or something, given all the different variations and versions and one-handed and
The C grades.
C grades and everything.
Yeah.
It was insane.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then you go to UCSD, and it sounds like you did a little bit of climbing there, but you were more focused on
I did.
your
I spent a little bit of
education.
time. I was going to places like Mount Woodson. I have a few kind of FAs there at Mount Woodson.
Were you ever looking back at what Alan ended up doing at Smith and feeling like you missed out?
I was. I mean,
Yeah.
by the mid-'80s, by say 85, 86, I would come back and I would go out there and I'd just like, oh my God, this is amazing what's happening.
Yeah.
Once he started wrapping down those faces and seeing what was possible, that's when the sport changed, basically. And seeing that, whoa, there's all this new kind of climbing going on and we're placing bolts now with power drills. And I was really blown away. But at the same time, I was also very much locked into a pretty hardcore PhD program. And I was really completely focused on academics at that point. I would go out climbing occasionally, but I was really working to get my PhD done. And I had a good career. I had a couple good publications as a graduate student.
Okay.
One which wound up being a noteworthy paper. I think it's been reprinted 7 or 8 times. And so that really was where my focus was at that time. And then when I went to Notre Dame, I kind of, especially thinking, wow, man, I'm moving to the Midwest. It's freaking cornfields everywhere.
Yeah.
There's really no climbing anywhere around here. So again, I was largely focused on my career, focused on philosophy, focused on getting tenure and all that sort of stuff.
Had you resolved to let climbing go at that point?
It was hard. It was
Okay.
really hard. I was missing it a
Yeah.
lot.
Okay.
And mostly what I'd have to say I was missing was both the athleticism and pushing myself, but I also was really missing the sort of being part of a climbing community.
Yeah.
I think climbers are really interesting individuals. They're interesting characters. They often have interesting insights on things. And I just miss being a part of that. And sort of, going into a pub and hearing about somebody's day, some climbing story where they got scared.
Yeah.
I just missed all of that. And so I was kind of looking to get back into it. And then once I got tenure, I felt like I could relax a little bit on the academic stuff. And about that time is when I found out about the Red. And that really changed everything for me.
Okay. So what drew you to philosophy?
That's a really good question. Had you told me when I started at U of O that I was going to wind up being a philosophy professor, I would have just laughed. I just thought that's the most ridiculous thing.
What did you start out in?
Well, I didn't really start out of anything. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I just kind of
just
assumed
taking
I was going to wind up with a business major because that's what everybody did.
Huh.
But I was curious, and I started taking philosophy classes, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, wow, these questions I've had in my life, these things I've pondered and thought about since I was a little kid, and I thought I was a freak thinking about these things.
Do you have an example?
Whether or not it's rational to believe in God. Questions about where does the rightness or wrongness of an act come from.
Okay.
Those sort of questions, I'd always kind of had them in the back of my mind. And then learning that there's this whole discipline that's devoted to addressing these questions was really eye-opening for me. And so I started take this philosophy class, and I thought, that was really good. I did pretty well in it. And I took another philosophy class. Like, wow, that was really interesting. I did pretty well in that. And so by the time I was a senior, I was starting to realize that I was going to major in philosophy. That's where all my credits were. And I was also starting to realize I was pretty good at it. Like, I actually seemed to have a knack for it. The graduate students there would often come and sort of ask me questions and things.
Okay.
So I kind of thought, I wonder if I could maybe consider a career here or go to grad school. And mostly what I was thinking is, well, I don't know what I want to do for sure, but if I go to grad school, I can kind of continue climbing, and that sounds like a pretty good existence. And maybe if I just wind up getting my master's degree, that'll still be an accomplishment. And then when I left school, I really missed being in school. So I moved to San Diego, and I just worked odd jobs for about a year.
Okay.
I worked as a bagel baker and as a runner at a DARPA research facility where we built this gigantic laser. It was part of Reagan's Star Wars program.
Oh, no kidding.
So I was a bus boy. I did all these odd jobs, and I saved up a bunch of money.
Is this before UCSD?
Yeah, it was while I was waiting. I was getting my residency in California. I knew I wanted to take a little bit of break between undergraduate and grad school. I was applying to grad school, taking the GREs and things like that, but just working these jobs and really hating not being in school. But I did at least save up enough money where I could take a trip to Arapiles. So I wound up taking a trip to Arapiles, I believe, in 1983.
Okay.
83 or 84.
For listeners, that's in Australia.
Yeah, that's in Australia. And at the time, that was kind of considered one of the major international climbing areas. People knew who Kim Kerrigan was. He'd traveled around. And that was actually a really, really great trip. I met a lot of really interesting characters over there. And a bunch of Australians had been visiting me the spring before. So I just had a good time. And then I came back, and then that following fall, I started graduate school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you.
But at the time I started graduate school, I thought, well, I can do graduate school and still climb. And then the more I got into graduate school, the more I was, this is hard work. This is going to take some effort, and I can't be out climbing all the time. So that's when I probably started backing away from climbing.
Okay.
But I was missing it immediately, and then when I moved to Notre Dame, I really missed it. And I thought, man, if there's some way I can get back into it, I really want to. And like I said, that's about the time I found out about the Red, was completely blown away by what was down there, was completely blown away by what an interesting community of characters there are at the Red. Really, really good people, really fun people to hang out with. And I thought, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And in many ways, that then became my social life.
Yeah.
I was driving 400 miles each way pretty much every weekend, both to climb, and then here's where all my friends were. I mean, I have academic friends at Notre Dame, but I didn't know anybody else really in South Bend. And I had an apartment in Chicago. I dated a woman in Chicago for a while. But generally, I didn't like that commute either, and I wasn't a huge fan of the big city. So finding this community of individuals in Kentucky where I could stay at their place and hang out with them, and we go climbing, and they're really good folks, I just really enjoyed that. So,
how long have you been in Vegas now?
I moved here in 2007.
And how did that get on your radar?
Good question. On 2005, I was on sabbatical, and I often try to use sabbaticals as little ways to go sample different climbing areas. I feel like I'm pretty lucky. I've kind of been a local at maybe 5 or 6 different climbing areas, just given where I spend my summers and things like that. But I'd never really spent any time in Vegas. And so I thought, I should go out there and check out some of the climbing out there. And so I had a friend here, Stephanie Forte, and she needed a housemate. So I moved in with her, and my main goal was that's kind of one major climbing area I don't really know much about. I haven't really done anything at the Charleston or in that area.
So
I climbed at the VRG, and I'd fly into Vegas from South Bend to go to Bishop, to go to some of the areas around here. But in terms of focusing on Vegas as kind of the destination where I'm going to live, I thought, I'm going to go check that out. So I lived here for about 8 months.
Okay.
And that was a year I did stuff like Root of All Evil and a few of the 514s up at Charleston, a couple of them, I guess. And man, I thought, this place is awesome. This is really a good place. This is great. And I gave a talk at the philosophy department here, and the chair of the department at the time is a friend of mine, and he said, I told him, I'm like, hey, I really like it out here. If you guys ever have any kind of an appointment or anything, just keep me up on that. And I'd been wanting to move west for some time, I really was very happy with the university at Notre Dame. I didn't really have a problem with the school. I liked the people there. I liked the students a lot. But I really didn't like the Midwest. And I was really starting to grind on me to do this drive to Kentucky every single weekend to climb.
That's a lot.
And I was spending time in Chicago. I was spending time in Kentucky, spending time in South Bend. And I just felt like my life was scattered. And I wanted to live someplace where everything was consolidated. And I thought, man, I could do that in Las Vegas. So I said this to the department chair, and he's like, oh, really? Well, let me look into it. And they then pretty much created a position for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I came out the following year and interviewed, and they hired me.
Huh.
So that was actually really cool. So I moved here in 2007. It was also good because I could be closer to my family up in Oregon. It's just easy to zip up there. And right away, I was just like a kid in a candy shop. There's all these great cliffs around here. There's all this great climbing. I don't think there's any place in the country where you have a major metropolitan area that's surrounded by so much climbing of such variety.
Yeah.
You have world-class bouldering, world-class sport climbing, and world-class multi-pitch trad climbing.
And it's good year-round.
It's just year-round, yeah. So it's pretty unbelievable.
It's interesting because even if you talk about Vegas to most people now, they think of Red Rocks.
Yeah.
But so the limestone is really what makes it amazing. And there's so many different limestone cliffs. So that was on your radar right from the beginning.
Right from the beginning, because I knew there'd been this history here when Joe Brooks and Jason Campbell and various other people were here. Vegas was kind of one of the top destination places. When the French would come over to sample the hard climbs, they would often fly straight to Vegas and spend their time here. And so there was often a little bit of a rivalry between, I think, Vegas and some of the other areas. I think if you ask some of the people living out there at the time who were working for one of the climbing magazines, they would agree that perhaps the characterization of Vegas was deliberately negative at times, perhaps. But in any event, so yeah, it had this history that I knew was really good limestone climbing. And then it sort of fell out of favor, became kind of persona non grata of the climbing areas. But I just knew these routes were really good, and I started climbing them, and I'm just like, wow, this stuff is amazing. And now, of course, it's enjoying kind of resurgence. Now that Segrist and Honnold are climbing up at Potosi.
Yeah, and Potosi
is now kind of a cool cliff again. Yeah, it's not an evil place after all. But yeah, all these cliffs around here are great, and there's so much availability within a couple hours of different stuff. All the stuff around southern Utah is easy to get to, and you're only a few hours from Bishop, a few hours from Flagstaff. So yeah, I have no regrets whatsoever. I really, really like it here. I like the fact that where we are right now in my place, 20 minutes in one direction, you're in this beautiful, pristine desert with tons of climbing possibility. 20 minutes the other direction, it's just crazy urban Disneyland. Yeah. And you can see whatever shows or get whatever meals you want, and it's really cool that way.
Yeah, it is a pretty...
The contrast makes it kind of neat.
Combination.
Yeah, yeah.
So one thing that's uniquely inspiring about you, in my mind, is at this point, you've done 26 or 27 514s.
Yeah, something like that. Thanks. Yeah.
All but one of them after age 40.
Yeah. Omaha Beach at that time when I did it was 13D. So Badman was the only one I did before 40. And then I think 42, I did Super Tweak, which is 14B.
At American Fork?
It's actually up in Logan.
Oh, okay.
It's at the China Wall in Logan.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's, comically, I said to myself, man, I'll never climb 14B again. This is too hard. And I've done a few since then. But yeah.
I think you've said that a few times.
Yeah. But in any event, I feel like I've been really fortunate and really lucky to be able to have a second career that's been as successful as it has been being older like that.
Was there a shift in your approach, you think, that led to this really successful past decade, or was it just that you'd been climbing long enough that you finally kind of crossed some threshold? How do you think about that?
Probably a lot of different factors. Part of it probably I was able to have a successful second career, probably because I did take that time off.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. The fact that I wasn't, dynoing through my 20s basically and grabbing small crimps and tearing my shoulder up or whatever, is probably what allowed me to climb pretty well in my 40s, to have that time off. I probably had fewer injuries than I would have had I been climbing that whole time. And I think that I've got pretty good genes, and I think that helps. And I feel like as you get older, you learn how to listen to your body. and you learn how to let go when you need to. I feel like sometimes people train and they're like, I'm going to latch that hold no matter what, and they do this big dyno, and they hang on even though things don't quite feel right, and then something tears. And I think one thing you get good at as you get older is you pick up on that right away and you let go. If something doesn't feel quite right, I let go. So I think being a lot more intelligent about training, doing things like warming up. So I've never had an injury that was due to having too big of a day, like at the end of the day. People always talk about people getting injured because they're tired. I've never had anything like that ever happen. Any injury I've had was due to not warming up enough. And so I'm pretty religious about warming up. Like, it takes me now about an hour to warm up.
What does your warm up look
Jeez,
like?
I mean, first those cup of coffees. That's the first step. And then getting out of bed's the next step. But then I'll hang off a fingerboard for maybe 10 seconds. And then, come do something, go drink some more coffee, come hang for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, do 1 pull-up, then do 5 pull-ups, then do 20 pull-ups. If I'm going to do weighted dead hangs, I'll start with lightweight and then just kind of work my way up. I used to do quite a lot of stretching because I felt like that was a kind of a secret weapon I had where my turnout was really good and I could get in really tight to the wall. So I'd really work on stretching. That'd kind of be all part of my warm-up routine.
Would you do static stretching before?
Yeah, I would. I would try to maybe get on the exercise bike. But I think one of the goofier training memes out there right now is no one should ever do static stretching. I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
If you look at a gymnast or a ballerina,
totally,
they're flexible for a reason. And it's not from doing high kicks. So if you're warming up to do something, you want to be dynamically stretching. But at the end of the day or after a certain sort of process, I think you want to have a routine of static stretching as well. Just to open up that range of motion.
Are there specific go-tos that you have worked on?
Yeah, like the kind of frog where you basically are just kind of frogging, laying down on the ground and trying to get your knees to go straight out, and you get your crotch right onto the ground as much as possible. That's replicating getting in really close at a rest where you're taking weight off your hands, the tighter you get. Just, a lot of the standard stretches, hurdler stretches, just basic things that I think most climbing books would recommend you do. Upper body stretches, shoulder stretches, things like that. Trying to open up the shoulders a little bit more. I feel like all those things are good.
What would be like a protocol that you would do? How long would you hold them? How many sets?
I think it count to about 25 or 30 for a particular stretch. I think that is a good friend of ours who climbs here, a good climbing person in the climbing community, Craig Berman, has actually written a book on how to stretch. It's a really good book. And
I'll link to that. I'll ask you about it later.
Probably about a half-hour routine. So maybe holding things for 30 seconds and going through different positions. I just think it kind of helps me feel limbered up. A lot of times I'll go for a run beforehand. So like when I was climbing on Golden and when I climb in Rifle, I get up, first thing I do kind of is do a little bit of stretching and then go for make a 15-minute run. Just so that when I'm stretching then to get the day going, I'm a little limbered up. I got some blood in the muscles, and I think that helps with the stretching too.
So it sounds like you do a little bit more of the dynamic sort of stretching as part of the warm-up. And then this 30-minute routine is a separate thing? Yeah,
like at the end of the day.
Like every day or just on training days?
No, well, yeah, on every day when I'm really in the thick of things. I'm getting close on a project or something like that. Yeah, definitely.
Does your warm-up change at all for your big indoor training days versus like a red pointing day?
Yeah, the warm-up's not so different. But then what I do for a red pointing day, when I was working like Jumbo and Golden, I recognized that when you're in the early phases of a project and you're really not going to send it, you don't want to start atrophying right away. And that's what happens when you project. You get weaker overall. So what occurred to me is that you can still maintain training. If your project's somewhere near where you live, you can keep up the training while you're projecting. And so I would train a little bit in the morning before getting on these projects. Maybe an hour or so fingerboarding or something like that.
Got you.
And I would probably be a little bit diminished, but not a lot. And I'd still be making progress on the project. So then when you get really close, you're really getting close to red pointing, then I would cut some of that out. And then I would get to the cliff feeling a little bit stronger, a little bit more fresh. And I would also have the strength now. I'd be kind of peaking in strength to take it over the top and to do the project. So either a little bit of training beforehand or maybe a little bit of training afterwards. I just believe in continuing the training when you're in project mode, if it's possible. I think that's really helpful. When I was at Rifle, I had one of those tripods for the fingerboards. And I was climbing on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I would always make a point then of training Friday night, training pretty hard Friday night. and then take Saturday and Sunday off.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, that worked pretty well.
So let's say you're trying jumbo pumping height, and maybe you're still like in the process where you're not really close to red pointing.
Right.
So you'd wake up, do a very similar warm up to what you described.
Yep.
Do a few max hangs.
Do a few max hangs. Yep. Maybe
Okay.
I've got a little homemade fingerboard I use that has about a 13 millimeter edge on it. That's
Okay.
really friendly, really comfortable. So I would hang off of that for about 7 seconds with maybe 80, 90 pounds added.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Something like that. Maybe
Different
do
grip
5
positions or.
It's not just open hand, completely
Okay.
open hand, and do maybe like 5 or 6 reps of that. If I'm in really training mode, it'd be maybe 7 or 8 reps, and be two sets. Whereas I maybe just like if I'm getting up to climb on jumbo, I'd maybe just do 1 set, and maybe do 1 other set with 2 finger pockets or something like that.
So this
that
is
reps-
like repeaters, like
No, this would be more maxing. It'd be more like 7 seconds on and 70-second rest.
Got it.
Something like that.
Okay.
Or even 2-minute rest.
Okay.
So more weight. There's no way I could do repeaters with 90 pounds on.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
yeah. I got thrown off. You said 6 or 7 reps, but then you also thought
Yeah.
about sets.
I would do 7 seconds on, rest 70 seconds, do another one.
Do that 7 times.
Yeah.
And then how did the sets fit into that?
I would do maybe 2 sets or 3 sets when I'm in training mode.
Okay.
And when I'm in semi-training mode, because I'm on a project, maybe only 1 set.
And just you mean longer rests between?
No, I
sets,
mean,
or-
I would do the same amount of resting, but instead of doing that 7 times and then waiting and then doing it again, which would be another set, I would just do that once.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and if I feel like a climb, one thing that I like to do is also replicate the hard moves as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So for jumbo pumping height, for example, there's this gigantic dyno on it that was just shutting me down. And I actually replicated it pretty well in my garage.
Okay.
So I would put on a weight belt and do that a few times, just so I'm already kind of got the feel of it by the time I get up to the cliff. And I feel like that helped quite a lot.
On a climbing, like on a board?
Yeah, I've got little climbing walls in my garage.
Okay.
It's tough because they're not very big.
Did you use the weight belt to try to replicate the
rope drag? Yeah.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, I use the weight belt to try to replicate rope drag. So I'll make only 5 pounds or 2.5 pounds.
Okay.
But it would make it a little bit harder. And I would try to get the feet as accurately modeling what's on the route as possible. And just kind of doing it a few times. Because a lot of times I feel like your first burn, you're just kind of relearning things and you're getting the feel for it again. And so that's kind of a waste. But if you can already have kind of done the move a couple times. I mean, also like when I was working Golden, I would go up to the crux and do the crux 3 or 4 times as part of my warm-up. That'd be the first thing I would do of the day. I would climb this 12 and then cross over onto the head wall, pull my way up to the crux and do the crux. That's my first warm-up. And then I would go do like a 13A or something like that.
Okay.
Because I really feel like, it's like if you think about it, in gymnastics, a gymnast, if they're going to warm up for their floor routine or their high bar routine, or they're going to do moves in that routine.
Right.
They're going to go up and do the individual moves. They're not going to just walk in and stretch and then try to do their performance cold like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to do something like that for the route. But of course, if the moves are 100 feet off the ground, it's hard to get up there and do it. So I'd try to replicate those moves in the garage. So I'm kind of doing it before I even get to the cliff. I've kind of already done the crux a couple times. And I think that does 2 things. It warms you up for it for that day, but also doing that move over and over again, it makes you stronger on those holds. So I think it's really quite beneficial to have that kind of program. If you can do that, if you can replicate individual cruxes on a project that you're working on in your garage or wherever at your favorite climbing gym, I think it's dumb not to.
Yeah.
I think it really helps.
I've heard you talk about setting up replicas not to be exact, but to do a bunch of different similar replicas to a boulder problem or a crux on your project.
Ideally, the replica you set up is a little bit harder.
Okay.
The holds are a little bit smaller.
Do you
maybe
try
it's a
to
little bit
mimic
steeper.
it as perfectly as
I
possible?
do. I mean, I'm up there with a tape measure.
Are you?
Yeah. I'm up there with
Yeah.
a freaking tape measure and taking pictures. It's like I'm a detective. And a forensic team, basically.
How do you deal with the angle? Because I'm sure
It's
your draw
hard,
wall...
so it's not perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Your phone has on a tilt meter,
Uh-huh.
so you can just hold your phone up to the wall and kind of get a sense of what the angle is.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect.
That's
But you got to
awesome.
work really hard to make it as perfect as possible. And
How do you find the right holds?
Oh, you go online and you look at holds and you study holds that are available and then you order them. That's exactly what I did. There were particular holds I wanted, and I went online, went to all the different hold companies, and then like, okay, this is the one that's really going to replicate. Or I just make them out of wood.
Okay.
I've done that quite a bit. In fact, I think the hold that I was using to replicate the hold you go off of when you do the dyno, I just made with wood. Yeah, so it's pretty easy to construct wooden holds that are replicating what you're trying to do. Yeah, I mean, if you went out there right now, you'd see there's all these weird holds that have paper towels stuffed in behind them where some of the holds been taken away or they've been sanded down in certain ways. And that's just all me trying to perfectly replicate the hold on a given route.
I have to go look at this. I'm going to take a photo of it and link to it in the show notes for people to look at.
But yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because I think that, you're trying to model this thing and it's really challenging you. And you want to feel comfortable on it, and practice makes perfect. So there you go.
How much harder will you shoot for?
Not a lot harder, because if you make it too hard, you're not going to be able to do it at all, and you get frustrated.
Like a V grade or two, something like that?
Maybe half a V grade or V grade, maybe something like that. But, you do want it to be something that when you're on the route, this feels a little easier.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel so bad.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot to be said for, I mean, that's one reason why I like using the treadwall, because the fundamental principle of training is incremental increasing of difficulty. And when you just go to the climbing gym and you just get on these boulder problems and they're only there for a week and a half because they're going to take them down, you don't really get to factor that in. But if you're on something like a treadwall or something where you can adjust the angle, I guess the kilter board's kind of like this now, you can get a problem dialed and then make it progressively harder. You can also do this by adding weight belts and stuff like that. I've heard of people doing it where they actually start sanding off the holds, making the holds a little bit smaller. So all that I think makes good sense. And of course, if you can do a crux sequence on a version of it that's harder than what you're going to encounter on the route, that's going to be beneficial. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that.
That's a great segue, because I wanted to come back to some more of your training stuff.
Okay.
We were at the climbing gym here the other day. I got here right when it rained, so
right. Nice timing. The one day out of the year.
But you showed up. You're on the treadwall, and you said, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said the treadwall was the most important and critical training tool in rock climbing.
I think for me, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think, look, maybe I should qualify that a little bit. I would say for a route climber.
I think you did say that.
For a route climber who's trying to develop the endurance or the power endurance, I definitely feel comfortable saying it is the most underutilized device that exists. I'm blown away by the number of coaches and trainers who don't do anything with it. They don't incorporate it at all in any way. And maybe it's because they're kind of rare. They're kind of hard to find.
They are, yeah.
But that's just because no one's using them, right? I mean, if there's a market for them, there'll be a company that starts building them. Look, here's an analogy that I sometimes use. Suppose that you're trapped in a 10 by 10 cell and you're training for a 12K, okay? And there's two options in terms of how you can do this. We can bring in a treadmill and you can train on that, or you can do wind sprints in your cell. Go back and forth in your cell. If they were climbers, they'd be like, okay, I'm going to do the wind sprints. It's like, so it's kind of like, oh no. I mean, in terms of doing continually 40, 50 moves, where you're going up the whole time, you can't beat it. That doesn't mean that 4x4s aren't helpful, and that doesn't mean that you can't do routes in the gym, because now we have 80-foot routes in gyms. But just in terms of having like 5 or 6 or 7 routes you've dialed in, and being able to then link them together to come up with all different kinds of combinations to link them up. So now you're doing a 70, 80-foot route on the treadwall. I just don't see anything that beats it. And I don't see anything that's going to prepare you for hard climbing on routes any better than that. Now, I know it takes some getting used to. You have to wire those climbs. That's part of it.
Especially on the one at the gym here.
Yeah.
It's short enough. I was watching you climb on it, and you're reaching up around the angle change.
Ideally, they're a little bigger. There's actually a version of that machine that's larger. It seems like everybody in band has one these days. But yeah, you want to put on 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 routes and then do these interesting link-ups. It is drudgery. It's work. It's training, right? It's not like going into the bouldering gym and like, oh, here's this cool problem. That's fun. It's like, oh, I'm going to try to do this cool problem or this new thing on the moonboard. I'm going to try to do this. That's challenging and interesting. It's a lot like climbing, and so it's fun. Using the treadwall is a lot more like doing laps in the pool, or it's a lot more like going for a long run. It's more work. But I definitely feel like if I hadn't been doing that sort of training, I wouldn't have climbed all those 514s. It gets you fit. It gives you that kind of endurance. And of course, you can do things like have rests on the machine where you stop the machine and shake out just like you're going to do on your climb. You can train resting and recovery that way. So I actually do think it's an underutilized device. It may not be the most important device, but it certainly is the one that I would say it's kind of amazing when you think about how much route climbing involves endurance. It's kind of amazing that more people don't use it. You know, those wide guys, those guys who came over and did all those off-wits, what did they do?
Wide boys.
The wide boys, yeah. They built this gigantic off-wit to train on.
Yeah.
And it was hard work, I'm sure. But they basically built a kind of crack machine, was what we used to call them.
Yeah.
To develop those skills. And the thing about a treadwall is you can do that for face climbing. Actually, I know a guy who actually has cracks on a treadwall.
Really?
Yeah, he's built blocks of wood that you can jam.
Oh, wow.
So you can even train jamming on these things.
That's cool.
But I mean, you know, this idea, okay, I got this thing down now. I just barely got through the green route into the red route, into the purple route. And I did that at a 10-degree overhang. So now next week I'm going to try to do it at a 13-degree overhang or something like that. Then next week it's going to be a 70-degree overhang. And you just keep getting stronger and stronger. I mean, I think he'd tell you, if you talk to Jonathan, that first trip he took to the Red, I bet one of his main training programs was just climbing on campus rungs on a treadwall.
Yeah.
And he just got ridiculously good endurance that way.
I'll have to ask him about that. I kind of recall reading on his blog years ago that he was doing that with socks.
That's
he was
entirely possible.
I think he was just wearing socks.
Fortunately, you can actually climb in socks at the Red because all the footholds are gigantic, so it didn't really make any difference. But I think that he understood.
Got too easy, and so he just started doing it with socks.
Yeah, and he just acquired this insane capacity for power endurance and endurance where he could just hang on forever.
Yeah. So what is your approach then? You had mentioned like 40 moves. Are you thinking about kind of climbing route length things on there?
Yeah.
Are you arcing on there at all?
A little bit. I've done that too, where it's much less steep, and I try to stay on for 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
It's actually hard. I mean, it's actually pretty tough because you're climbing for quite a ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm using it for arcing. I think that's really smart.
But more of it's targeted towards the length of
the length of time. But most of the time, I'm looking for the length of route, and it depends on the kind of route I'm trying to do. If the route's it's pretty steep and it's got pretty good holds, then I'll probably try to be doing large moves between pretty good holds at a pretty steep angle. If the route's a little longer, maybe a little less steep, then I'll be focused more on that. So it's a lot of times you can shift it around and gear it towards the particular climb that you're actually working on. And so again, that's what makes its variability such a good thing to work out on. But it is work. There's no question. It's not necessarily fun. I mean, you can put on your headphones and listen to music and have the fan blowing on you the whole time, but you're getting pumped, and the sensation of lactic acid is not enjoyable.
Yeah.
You know, fighting through that sensation of lactic acid in your forearms, that's kind of painful.
Do you play with the speed or the pace?
Yep. I've tried to use it to make myself climb faster. I remember when Jonathan and I were training on it one time, and he was just couldn't believe how slow I was going. It seemed like and I'd watch him like, God, I can't believe how fast you're going. How do you do that?
That's interesting because he seems to climb pretty slow.
Yeah, I know, but
outdoors.
not like me. so I mean, I'm basically going backwards compared to him. But I recognized that, and then I watched a video of myself climbing on this thing up at Clark, and I'm like, oh my God, I really am moving slow.
Interesting.
So I used it then to try to accelerate my climbing, to make me climb faster. And I think it's been helpful in that way.
Okay.
So I'm going quite a bit faster now than I used to.
Okay.
I'm sure yesterday you're watching like, God, Bill just seems to hardly be moving on that
I didn't notice that, no. I did glance over, though, and you had your earphones in like you were saying, and you did a set, and then you sat down and you were writing something in a notebook.
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep track of what you're doing and where you are in your training. And so I was writing red into green into purple, or rainbow into zebra at such and such 65 degrees or whatever.
Okay.
You know, and
counting the
and
number
whether
of
or not I
moves.
succeeded or not at that particular route, or where I fell off. I just want to kind of keep track of that so that the next time around I can go back and look at where I was and say, oh, well, I feel a little stronger today. I'm going to try to improve on that. So yeah, I really am a firm believer in keeping, that's what all those things are over there, keeping journals. I've been keeping a journal for several years now.
Got you.
Yeah.
So with your massive training days, are you having a lot of the same ingredients in each session every time?
Yeah, quite often I am.
Okay.
I'm kind of a creature of habit, so I like kind of doing things the same way. But I'm generally, this is less so now that I'm getting older, but generally I'm always trying to improve. I'm just trying to add a couple more pounds maybe to the dead hangs, maybe add one more kind of hold that I'm going to dead hang off of, a different kind of grip or something like that. I'm going to try to do better on the treadwall. I'm going to maybe try to get more points on the moon board. If I'm going to go to the moon board, I keep track of how many points I'm getting. So maybe I'll try for a 50-point hour session or something like that. So yeah, generally I keep track of things and I do pretty much the same stuff, but I am trying to see improvement.
How do you think about progressing different facets? Are you working on progressing all of those things at the same time, or are you focused more on...
It's kind of crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does it work?
I think it does.
Okay.
I would argue that more and more people are getting away from the traditional periodization. I would say that if you do it all at once, you're going to improve each facet, but there'll be less improvement in any given facet than you would see if you just focused on that facet.
Sure.
So one of the reasons why I didn't like the periodization, I'm climbing at the red. I'm like, well, I don't want this to be a power phase where I can't climb routes. So I don't want this to where I only have endurance now and I can't do a hard move. I want everything to be clicking pretty well. So I would just combine everything in a couple days. And I would still see some level of progress in my power, in my strength, and in my endurance. But it would not be... Like sometimes I would just, I'm just going to focus on power now, and just because I'm going to have a big bouldering trip coming up to Bishop, and then I would really get stronger fingers in. I would really see a power boost. But a lot of times I would be climbing and I would want everything to be firing. And so I would see incremental progress, not as much progress, but a little bit of progress in every facet every week.
So you think it kind of comes out in the wash?
I think I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
Yeah.
I think more and more people now are like having maybe a week devoted to power and then maybe a week devoted to endurance, or even more. I think I just listened to Leif Gash talk to Neely, and he was saying that he did his first the hard route he wanted to do by kind of having individual days be focused. So like one day of the week is really max hang power type stuff, bouldering. Another day of the week was power endurance, and another day of the week was more arcing and endurance training. And I think he found that particularly. So it's just kind of, everybody's kind of understands there are these different energy systems, and you want to focus on those energy systems and with regard to a particular exercise. But how much you spread out the overall workout between that focus on different energy systems varies among different people.
It seems like the jury's out as to...
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
It does sound, though, like you typically stick to the conventional wisdom of strength first, then more power endurance or strength endurance, and then more endurance.
Yep, I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
Take care of the power early when you're the most fresh, and then leave the endurance stuff for later when you're a little more tired.
How do you think about that with skills work or learning new movement or things like that?
Oh, I mean, I've been climbing for 45 years.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think anything about skill work. I don't do any of that at all.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean I probably wouldn't help with it, but, you know, I'm an old dog. I'm not going to be learning any new tricks. So, yeah, that's just not on the agenda.
So you talked briefly about training resting positions. You mentioned that on the treadwall, but I've also heard you talk about like mimicking or setting a replica of a rest position.
Sure.
Yeah,
like on Golden, there's a really strenuous rest before you do the crux, where you got to do this really kind of strenuous undercling. So I would build that in the garage, and I would put on a weight vest and kind of try to hang out in that position, watch TV or something like that, you know, read a book, and just kind of like until I just couldn't hang on anymore. And I felt like it was really good for the particular hand or arm strength, but also it worked out pretty well for the core strength that you need for that rest too.
Interesting.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of times you hear people get to a rest and they're like, I'm not getting anything back. And I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. You should be getting something back. You watch a really good climber like Mike, and he gets to a rest, and it's almost like he's hanging on the rope. He's getting everything back.
Mike Doyle.
Yeah. He just has such good endurance and such good resting technique. Yeah, I think you can train that. And anything you can do to replicate what's making you suffer on the route so that you suffer less on the route, and it makes you feel a little more comfortable when you're there, is a good thing. And that's just, I think, a general principle for training. I think it's a general principle across basically all sports. It's like, you know, people have when they have a big game coming up, they'll pipe in the crowd noise if they have a big away game to try to make it as just like it's going to be on the real thing. You're trying to simulate it as much as possible. And it's even a little bit better if you can make it a little bit worse. Because then when you're there, you're saying to yourself, it doesn't feel so bad. This isn't quite so bad.
What about opposition work? Do you do any training for that sort of stuff?
Not really, no.
Really? Okay.
I mean, like pinch training?
No, sorry. I mean like...
You mean opposing muscle groups?
Opposing muscle groups and stuff for maybe injury prevention, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't do as much as I should.
Interesting.
I don't. I mean, I'll do push-ups and things like that, and I'll try to do some core training. But generally, I kind of suspect a little bit's overblown.
Yeah.
I think that that's maybe hyped a little bit too much. I'm sure there's imbalances that I have, but I don't think it's that big a deal necessarily.
That's really interesting. That's really resonating with me just specifically right now, because I'm the person that gets sucked into, I'll hear a compelling argument for something like that, and all of a sudden I'm like doing mostly stuff that's not really that directly relevant.
Yeah, I see that happen all the time. And I think part of the reason is because so many trainers and coaches have come out of these programs where they've learned all this cool CrossFit stuff and weightlifting, and they have all this knowledge about core. And increasingly, it seems like at least some people, they're spending 60-70% of their time doing exercises that have nothing to do with climbing. I mean, look, people were climbing pretty damn hard in the 90s.
I know.
Nobody was doing any of that stuff. No one was doing kettlebell workouts.
Just go read Jerry Moffat's book.
Yeah, exactly. And they were getting by okay. So I think some of that stuff is great and it makes sense and it's probably a really, really good idea. But my feeling is about 80-85% of what you're doing should be climbing specific. I mean, I'm just throwing that number out. I don't know where I got it. But I think a good chunk of what you're doing should be kind of really, really intensely focused on what happens when you climb.
And are you including in that the fingerboarding?
Yeah, I'm including fingerboarding in that.
Yeah.
I'm including campusing. I'm including treadwall, bouldering, all that stuff. But, squat thrusts, not so much.
Gotcha.
Or, kettlebell workouts. Yeah, okay, do that occasionally. But let's not get overboard on that.
Yeah.
If you want to get fit for climbing.
Cool. Last thing on training. In your conversation with Neely, and again, I'll link to it in the show notes, but you had some quick comment and you guys just kind of moved on right away, but you were talking about fingerboarding, and I think you said, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said you were talking about fingertip pull-ups, and you said it's the one thing that you still think matters that no one else is doing.
Well, I don't know about nobody else doing it. I think it's going to become something that more and more people are doing.
Yeah.
And I think there's two different things. So we want to distinguish two things because you could mean two different things. One thing is hanging off your fingers and doing pull-ups that are weighted.
Yes.
Yes, and I do that. And everybody tells you you're not supposed to do it and it's not that helpful because you're just doing pull-ups. I disagree.
Why?
I think generating that force to get up, pulling up through it, and then generating the force to slow down and stop, and then switch it back, going back up, that concentric movement, and going up and down like that with that much strain on your fingers is actually a good way to develop finger strength. And it's a good way to develop pulling on something that's pretty small with quite a bit of resistance.
Like a slight oscillating force load on your fingers.
Exactly.
Interesting.
The other thing I thought maybe, I misunderstood, I thought maybe what you're referring to is where you're literally closing an open hand grip into a kind of closed hand grip while you're hanging off of like a campus rung or campus edge or something like that. And I think that's also extremely beneficial. So those are called, I guess they're called finger ups.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yep.
And I said, Neely, I think there's a video of Daniel Woods doing this in one of the videos.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll find it, yeah.
And I believe that it's dicey, it's probably, you may get an injury from doing it, but I believe that if you can get in the habit of doing that kind of thing, it's going to be beneficial.
Okay.
I think that the idea that, you should just hang off your fingers and not move them, that doesn't really happen when you're climbing. Right?
Yeah.
If you're dynoing to something and you're going to try to latch it and then reel it into a closed crimp, you got to pull up on that. So your fingers are moving when you're holding on. So I think it's a good idea to do that kind of motion as well, even if you have to take weight off to do it.
So for listeners, the finger up in the video that you're referring with Daniel, I think he's like kind of in a half crimp position.
Yeah.
And then his arms are extended the whole time, his shoulders are engaged, and he reels the half crimp into a full crimp.
Yeah.
And then backs off again and just does
exactly.
reps of that.
Just does reps of that.
Yeah.
And I don't think your fingers have to move all that much.
Right.
Maybe half an inch or something like that is really all you need to do.
Yeah.
But pulling yourself up like that by your fingers is, I think, beneficial for your finger strength. Without a doubt. And your hand strength.
It's interesting with the fingertip pull-ups too, where you're hanging on a fingertip edge and you're doing regular pull-ups or weighted pull-ups. I find that interesting because there's a few coaches that I've heard advocate for really long duration hangs for tendon density. I think Tyler Nelson talks about that.
Okay.
And that's something that a lot of climbers did on door jams and whatnot, a long time ago. And it's a much longer duration hang when you're pumping out 10 pull-ups on an edge than we typically hang from. So I kind of wonder. It seems
believe
like it
in
makes
that.
sense from that.
I would have one where I would try to hang for 40 on, 30 off.
Oh, wow.
On like a 13 millimeter edge. I'm doing one now where I'm hanging off the 10 millimeter edge off of, there's a board that has all the different edges and they're marked. It's not the lattice rung. It's the
Tension climbing?
tension climbing. Yeah, exactly. And they have a 10 millimeter edge, and I'm trying to see how long I can hang off of that.
Okay.
And just like in a half crimp position.
Okay.
So yeah, I think there's something to be said for just hanging.
Yeah.
As long as you don't develop shoulder problems, and you got to engage a little bit. But yeah, if nothing else, you get the ability to hang on for a longer period of time.
So are you doing all of these things, or how do you think about cycling these things in and out? Do you do whichever ones you feel like you need at a given time, or?
I'll do all these things as part of my fingerboard routine. Like the other day before I saw you at Refuge, I'd probably been training about 4 hours in the garage.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, a lot of times I'll do about a 3-hour, 4-hour fingerboard workout, and then I'll go get on the moon board. And when I was working jumbo, I was trying to do 4x4s on the moon board. Just kind of swipe through real quickly and jump right back on another one. So I'll do like an hour and a half on the moon board. I think the moon board's really pretty good for building finger strength. It's really good for power. But I think any of these other boards that are similar also are good. And then I'll get on the machine, and I'll be doing more endurance training than on the machine.
On the treadwall.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Got you. So you've traveled a lot. You said you feel privileged that you're able to kind of be a local at 6 different areas. And
Yeah.
I know you know, Smith is on that list, Rifle, the Red, now Vegas.
Yeah, right. I spent time in Utah, in Salt Lake.
Okay.
I did a sabbatical there. So I had a couple seasons at American Fork and Maple. And so, yeah. So I feel really fortunate in that way, because these are all different communities. They're kind of slightly different personalities.
Yeah.
And it's kind of neat to go to these different areas and kind of see how people are doing things a little bit different outlooks, different attitudes. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, obviously.
Yeah.
There's just slight differences in different ways in which people approach climbing. Some places are a little more bouldering intense. Some people are a little more route intense. Some people like to just do everything that's available in these different areas. So, yeah, I think it's kind of neat to kind of get a sense of the different personalities of these different climbing communities.
I'd love to ask you about some of the trends that you may have noticed. Are you noticing any trends among the people that are really succeeding and doing well between these different areas?
Yeah, I think that they're getting younger and younger. That's one trend. There's a lot more of them now. It seems like everybody's climbing really hard right now.
I know.
And there is this focus on training that didn't used to be there. Or there was there, but it's just people are just taking it a lot more seriously now. And I would say that's kind of universal.
What about tactical approaches and things like that?
Yeah, I think at some areas, people are more focused on projects and doing big projects, whereas in other areas, people just want to go do quick ticks of things. And you'll get variation within the community. Different individuals have different agendas. But, certainly Rifle, for example, I tend to think of as a very project-oriented cliff. Some people just want to go out and do some climbs, but a lot of people are there, especially in the summertime. They're trying to do their hardest red point, or they've got some big project they want to do this summer. And so that's kind of more of a project-oriented cliff. Whereas I feel like at Red Rocks, it's much more of a vacation cliff. People are passing through. People are coming in to have a good time in Vegas. And so there's locals out there doing things, but you're much more likely to bump into an outsider, somebody from another part of the country at Red Rocks than a lot of other places. I think the Red has also got a mixture of folks. There's a big trad community at the Red a lot of people don't even know about.
Right.
It's a huge trad community, but there's also a lot of people there who are projecting, trying to have a big project. But there's a number of people who just want to go out and have fun, and just on-site everything they get on, basically. So that's there's a little bit of variation between different approaches to climbing that exist in that way.
I just listened to a conversation that you had on the Normalcast with Chris Kalous. Or no, I'm sorry. I listened to one that you had with Chris Hampton on the Power Company.
Right. Okay. Right.
And I was you've kind of got this reputation for some of these massive projects that 200 tries or 100 tries or whatever.
Exactly.
But I was really surprised to hear how much time you've spent developing and growing your root pyramid. You actually have done a ton of 513s. Yeah. And you do a lot more of that than I would have guessed.
Yeah, I mean,
so how do you think about balancing those things? And I guess when you think about, Rifle with more project climbing versus some of these other areas, how do you think about
I think you cycle through different phases. I think that I go through phases where I'm just wanting to have fun, I just want to get a bunch of ticks done this summer. I want to spend more than maybe 4 or 5 days on a project. So I'm doing stuff pretty quickly. And if I'm fit, it can still be pretty hard. I think I had one summer where I was doing a 13D like every 2 weeks or so.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I'm not anywhere near that kind of shape anymore. And I feel like I go through a phase where I'm just like, I want to go and have a good time. And basically, I'm not really want to throw myself at something. But then at the same time, every now and then, that gets a little bit boring. And you don't really feel like it's sufficiently challenging. And you really want to test yourself. You really want to see if you can do something that's really going to push you hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting process to go through as well.
Yeah.
And I think I've been doing it a little bit more lately because I feel like my time's running out. And so if there's some great climbs out there, I need to do it. And of course, that's how I felt about Jumbo Pumping Hate. It's such a beautiful route and it's such a classic climb that I'm like, you better get at it if you're going to try to do this thing.
Do you know how many tries that took you?
I was figuring it up with Chris Widener the other day. Probably, it depends on what you count as a try. Because, I mean, so early on in the process, you're just getting on it, checking things out, you're trying different things.
Sure.
That's not really a try. How many times I touched the route? Probably well over 100.
Uh-huh.
But, I mean, real tries, I don't know. It'd be hard to say. I'd have to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot. It was taking some time. I think I really put about 2.5 hard seasons on it.
Okay.
And
are you
really
trying?
3, actually.
Are you trying anything else at the same time? Do you have second tier projects?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I'm all in on that thing.
Yeah.
I was all in on it. I was trying to climb another route up there, but I just thought, no, this is too much effort. And it's tagging my skin up. So it's like, I'm just going to, I would do it as part of the warm up, but I was just like, I'm just going to focus on this thing.
Okay. Is that pretty common when you're trying like an A or B?
Yeah. I'm trying to focus on that for the most part.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a good idea. I think a lot of times it's good to have sub projects you can get on at the end of the day. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I know a lot of people do that. But I would often be trying my project still at the end of the day on some things. So
and then you come back down and train.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just go train.
Yeah.
And I'll do the other, the easier 513s sometime later in my career or whatever. But I'll go through those phases where I'm kind of, at some phase, I'm kind of having a good time, just trying to tick a bunch of stuff off. And other times it's like, okay, now I want to see what I'm capable of. And I know this thing, there's a really good chance I'm going to fail. There's a really good chance I'm not going to do it. Honestly, I didn't think I had any shot at Jumbo Pumping Hate.
Really?
Yeah, the day I did it, I thought, my goal is to have a good try-hard day. And the season was coming to an end. I'd kind of given up. I knew I was going to have hip surgery. So that, what, I put in a good effort on this thing. I feel pretty good about my effort, but this is going to be my final fail, basically.
So you mean not just that day? You didn't think you were going to do it at all?
By the time the spring rolled around, I was getting sufficiently dissatisfied with my progress on the route. I just kept falling on this first crux. I was pretty skeptical, and I didn't think I was. And I thought, man, then the second crux is really hard too. But then I tweaked my beta a little bit, and all of a sudden the first crux started feeling easier. And then this day, I just got to the first crux, got to the rest. Really tormented myself with the rest because it's just. The way you can rest is you can get a heel hook, but the heel hook is with the hip that was going bad, and it was just excruciatingly painful. But I'm like, you know what? Here I am. What the hell? Pain is pain. Just shake it out. Spend longer here than you want to, than you think you need to. I did, and then the second crux felt pretty good.
Wow.
And I just went to the anchors, and I'm like, holy crap, did that just happen?
Oh, man.
It was amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah. But I do like that process. I enjoy big projects. I'll have to say it's pretty damn similar to working in philosophy.
Okay.
When I'm working on a paper or I'm working on a book, there'll be things that I want to tinker with, and I want to play around with things, and I want to try something new. I'm going to develop this argument this way. I'm going to come up with this example over here, and I'll go back to it a lot. And it'll take time. Probably the papers I write to get published, they're probably 15 drafts or something like that. So I'm always going back and playing around with things and tinkering with things and trying to improve it. And I don't mind that process. I find that really quite enjoyable. I have an analytic mind, and I really like problem solving. And so getting on something that's really going to challenge me as a route, where I have to go back to it and try different things and think about maybe this is the wrong sequence here, I don't mind that process. I find that really enjoyable. And I think a lot of climbers do.
Yeah.
I think that the kind of climbers who are successful, who can stick with it, they're the kind of people who enjoy that problem solving with their body. I always say that climbers are basically nerds trapped in an athlete's body. Right? That's why there's so many of them are engineers and physicists and mathematicians and philosophers. And basically, it's because to enjoy this activity, you have to enjoy that problem-solving process.
Yeah.
So I think it's neat.
That resonates with me a lot.
Yeah.
I've heard you say, speaking to the nuance of routes, I've heard you say that, these routes have all these secrets.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I've really kind of come to appreciate that in the second half of my career, where I think I've understood this thing. I think I've got the beta all worked out. I know there's no other tweak I can do that's going to be a little more efficient. And I'll just think, well, maybe I'll try this, or I don't know, and 9 out of 10, it's like evolution, right? 9 out of 10 of the mutations are worthless, but then every now and then you get one that is definitely going to give you an advantage. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, that actually seems to help. It's like I tweaked my beta climbing into the crux of Jumbo. The other people had been doing it this other way. And the guy I was working on it with, Nate, who's like, yeah, you should try it this way. And I originally tried it the way most people do it, and I just wasn't strong enough at that time. But I tried it probably about a week before I did it, the way most people do it. And I'm like, oh, that's not so bad. And moreover, that cuts out 3 moves. So that made a huge difference for me getting through that first crux. So yes, climbs, it's like a video game. You know, there's all these little Easter eggs. And there's all these little secrets. And you have to interrogate them to get them to talk. They want to hide their secrets from you. And you have to ask the right questions in the right way. And that means continually trying different things, thinking about how you can make things more efficient. I always tell people there's this great scene in this movie. I think it's Apollo 11 or Apollo, one of the Apollo ones. Yeah, well, the one with Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out this engineering problem where how do we start up these engines in a manner that doesn't use up the energy that we're going to need to get them back to Earth. And they're going through all these different sequences. This is the absolute most efficient way to start up these engines in the simulator. And they're trying all these different things, and all of a sudden they come, okay, we finally found the perfect sequence for gearing up these engines in a way such that we're going to save all this energy and it's going to work. And I think that's kind of what goes on in climbing, where you work on a project and you're trying to figure out the exact sequence that's going to be the absolutely most efficient way for me to get from point A to point B, so that when you get to point C, you're going to have that residual strength that's just enough to get you through that move. Working through that process and working through that whole intellectual kind of interrogation of the route and trying to discover all these little hidden secrets, I find really fascinating and really enjoyable.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit more on this other level, though, because one thing that I've really struggled with, I've spent a lot of time climbing at Smith, and that's a place where you're greatly rewarded by exploring nuance. You know? Like some subtle little thing will make the route easier. But I fall into this trap quite often where I don't know when to stop doing that and when to just turn all that off and just to try harder.
Yeah.
And it can be really difficult to even tell which version or which beta is easier or harder, because it's difficult to commit fully to something that you're just kind of tinkering with. So how do you think about
I don't see those as mutually exclusive.
Okay.
I think if I'm going to try something new, I'm going to be trying my absolute hardest. Trying this new thing. I'm not going up there just, I'm curious how this is going to feel, but I am trying hard. And then if that doesn't work, then I'm going to be hanging on it like a good old hangdog, and trying to find something else that might work. But I think when you're implementing a particular new piece of beta, you should be giving it everything you have. You should be going 100%. And that should kind of be the norm. I mean, I feel like every time you go up on a project, you should maybe have some little slight thing you're going to try that's new, so that it's going to be informative for you. So you're going to still be finding something out, because otherwise it just becomes work. So I've often sent projects where I tried something a little bit different. I'm not talking about a huge modification of the beta, because by the time you get to your 80th try, you pretty much got it worked out. It's just these slight little tweaks that, again, are going to...
How you place a foot.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so like each little piece of beta, let's suppose that saves you 1/3 of a percentage of energy. Well, you do 4 or 5 of those, that's almost 2% stronger now when you get to a particular point in the climb. That's huge. That can make all the difference in the world between success and failure. So, if you add up enough of those little teeny slight variations that give you 1/5 of a percent or 1/3 of a percent, you add up enough of those and you're 5% stronger after a week of trying those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there's a lot to be said for just freaking trying really hard.
Yeah.
And I think what I got to is a point where, I mean, of course, this is soul-crushing activity. You're trying your hardest, and you're failing, and you're falling, and you're really frustrated. And so you're often looking for ways to make it a little bit more enjoyable. And if it's just work and you're just going up there and, going through the grind, that's not so much fun. And I found one of the ways in which failing isn't so bad is if you can feel pretty good about your performance. So there were times when I would be trying to do some of these hard routes, and I would be like, wow, I fell. But you know what? I left everything on that route, on that burn. I gave it everything I had. And so I kind of then feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
I feel much worse if I did something and I made a stupid mistake, or I just kind of gave up. I'm like, this isn't going to work. I'm just going to let go. I tend to think that's lame. I mean, sometimes that makes sense, especially if you're looking at a bad fall or something. But a lot of times, I feel like you can just feel pretty good about your day if you feel like you really, really, really tried hard. And so that would kind of be part of what I was trying to incorporate in every single attempt. And what I discovered is if you're really trying hard, guess what? Sometimes you can surprise yourself and you pull it off. So I'm a big believer in trying hard every single time.
Cool. So I was asking you if you've done quite a bit of writing. You put out some books, and I was asking if any of the stuff you've written would be interesting to me, to someone who has.
Probably not, given the feedback I've gotten from most of my climbing friends. They're like, "Wow, I didn't understand a word of that."
Yeah, it sounds like it's very academic.
It's pretty academic. My book, especially, it's a very niche, kind of narrow area of cognitive science, focused on the viability of cognitive representations in the brain, and just kind of like. Just to explain what that means, it's going to take another hour, basically. It's a huge area in the field that I work in. It's a very important area where philosophy and cognitive science intersect.
Okay.
And it's been a project that some of the smartest people in this field have been working on for about 40, 50 years. And so I'm kind of weighing in on that, basically.
Okay.
There are other papers that I have that are probably more accessible in philosophy. I wrote a paper on religious bigotry once, about what religious bigotry is and what it isn't, more importantly. And I basically argue that even ridicule or mocking of belief systems shouldn't be viewed as a form of bigotry, that you can only be bigoted against people and not belief systems. But anyhow, we can link to that paper if you want.
Okay.
But I have written a couple things in climbing. There was a notorious essay I wrote that was published in Rock and Ice a few years ago, where I defended chipping.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this. I haven't read it. I'll link to it, though.
Yeah, that was good fun. Actually, I got a lot of hostile feedback on that, but it's pretty good. And generally speaking, it's in the case of manufacturing, the reality is that it's kind of this little hidden secret that everybody kind of pretends no one does it. And when you get up to the higher grades, especially on limestone, pretty much everybody does it. And so, with all this controversy that just took place in 10 Sleep, I think the main thing is you want some degree of plausible deniability. We know that the holds are being modified, let's face it, because a lot of this stuff is choss, and you got to decide what you're going to keep and what you're going to get rid of.
Yeah.
And so it's almost unavoidable if you're going to clean these routes to do some quasi-manufacturing gluing, kind of modification of the hold and determining what you're going to leave and what you're not going to leave. And so it happens, and everybody kind of pretends it doesn't. But really, once you get above 514 on most limestone, especially in America, I think it's very, very, very rare you find a route that's entirely natural. I'd say the overwhelming majority of them have some kind of modification that goes on. So what you want to avoid is just the over-the-top stuff where you just, oh my God, this is a blatant pocket just drilled right into the blank wall.
Yeah.
You might try to avoid that as much as possible. It's ugly, and it detracts from the route. But I do believe that if we're going to be realistic and sort of appreciate the accomplishments of all these people who have put up these climbs that we climb on, we need to be a little more honest about what actually happens. Let's not go over the top, but let's just recognize that route development is route development. And, some of these, if you've been to the Wicked Cave in Rifle, or you've been up to Potosi or any of these places, it's pretty
Climb
clear.
Anything at Smith.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty clear. And so let's just kind of stop pretending and recognize what's really going on. That's
cool.
All. Yeah.
I'll have to go read that.
Yeah, and I wrote that thing for Andrew Bisharat's website that I really, really enjoyed. So he has this website called Evening Sends. And I wrote this essay about sending golden. It's in his a section called The Day I Sent.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed writing that because it was kind of my homage to the climbing world, basically.
Okay.
And yeah, take a look at that. I think you'll get a kick out of that.
Yeah,
I really put some effort into that, and I really felt good about how it came out.
Cool.
And I got a lot of really good positive feedback about it too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one thing I've written that I'm really pretty proud of.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have any more plans for writing along
Yeah, I
those
might.
lines?
Maybe down the road, probably thinking in a while here, I'm going to probably back off and do like a partial retirement. And I might consider doing more writing then, the fun sort and not the work sort.
Awesome.
So yeah, I really like writing, and the kind of writing that there's so many good writers now in the climbing world. It seems to me there's just an explosion of good writers. But insofar as I can make a contribution in that way, that would be really fun.
Great.
I wrote the foreword actually to Alan's new guidebook, the next edition.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I enjoyed writing that. I tried to capture some of the things that I think are really unique about Alan and unique about Smith Rock.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I'm happy to hear that. I'm looking forward to that. Is there anything that you are especially grateful for lately?
Yeah, I'm grateful that climbing has been a big part of my life.
Huh.
It's been really a huge part of my life. I feel, again, lucky that I've been pretty healthy. I mean, I just recently had surgery, and that's maybe taken a little longer to heal up than I had thought, but it's coming along. But it's just been I really feel incredibly fortunate. You know, as a kid, I think I looked ahead in my life, and we all sort of have this image. I know Alan kind of talks about what he wanted to do. And I think for me, I thought a really good life would be a life where I'm both a scholar and an athlete. Like that would be really rewarding. And so that's really what I've tried to do. I've tried to live a life where I can excel at two completely unrelated things and be pretty good at them. Not the best, but pretty good at them. And kind of have an international reputation in both. And that's really kind of fun. That's really kind of cool. And I feel really, really lucky to have had that kind of experience. And also, you know, these are two areas, academia, philosophy on the one hand, and climbing on the other hand, where you just meet really, really good people. Really, really decent, really good people. And so I feel like I've been really lucky in that regard. I feel like both of those communities, I feel really fortunate to be members of both of those communities. And so, yeah. I feel pretty fortunate that way.
I'm curious, is there crossover there, you think, or lessons that you're learning from your climbing, crossing over into philosophy?
Definitely. Just what I was saying earlier about this whole way you approach projecting. Like I have my philosophy projects that I'm working on. I'm working on a chapter for a book right now, somebody else's book. But and then I have my climbing projects. And like I say, there's a lot of similarity between those two, where you fiddle around with things and you try things and you see how it comes together, and eventually you get something that you really feel happy about. And I think it's pretty similar in both those areas, in both those fields. I think that climbing's taught me perseverance and, you know, the importance of hard work, and that applies in philosophy. And philosophy's taught me how to analytically try to go after problems, and that's helped me in climbing. So yeah, there's a lot of crossover there.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I just did an interview with Mike Doyle.
Yeah.
And we got talking.
Mike's one of those really great guys too, by the way.
He's amazing. Yeah.
He's a really, really good person.
And I think I don't even remember if it was recorded. I think it might have been after the interview, but we were kind of talking about the lore of climbing, and he almost wants to start like a show, like the truth and lies of climbing,
right?
Because there's all these stories that come out, and it's like, did that really happen? You know?
Oh yeah,
I'm sure. He mentioned one that I wanted to run by you to see if it's actually true. So the story is that you went to Yosemite and climbed Separate Reality. I don't know when this would have been. This might have been early 80s.
Yeah, like this was in actually, it was the year I did Half Dome, so it was 1979.
79. Okay.
Yeah.
So that part of it is true. And then the story goes that it was reported as Alan Watts climbing it because it was just some climber from Madras.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yes.
Because I think Alan had said, somebody came up to me and said, man, that's awesome you did Separate Reality. I'm like, what? Yeah. Well, what happened, and I talk a little bit about this in that Golden essay, is I was down there and I climbed Half Dome, and I was Alan kind of talks, I was a pretty cocky kid. I mean, he talks about me being a little more aggressive. I think the right word would be I was pretty cocky. And so I went to Yosemite, and I'd seen this cover of Mountain Magazine. It's amazing how much of climbing history is driven by covers of Mountain Magazine. But I'd seen this cover of Ray Jardine on it, and Alan is like, wow, look at this. This is incredible. And I'm like, wow, that really is incredible. And I thought, it looks like mostly a hand crack, and I'm pretty good at hand jamming. I should go try to do that. You know, I'd never been on a 512 in my life. And so I'd probably done some 11s, maybe some hard 11s, but I'd never been on anything that had been, 512 was brand new then. It was just coming into existence. So I got a couple of friends together, and I was probably pretty light because I'd just done Half Dome, and I just had an epic 3 days on Half Dome, and that's another story in itself. But I was probably pretty light, and I went there, and I got out on it, and I placed all the gear on lead, and kind of did a little hang-dogging on it, fell off a few times, but pulled back up and could kind of like see the moves and kind of see how it was possible. And then I lowered down, and then this rope appears, because you have to wrap down into it. And then who should appear but one of the gods himself, Tony Yanero.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just like, holy crap, this is Tony Yanero. And then another guy, I think his name was Eric Collins, who had just done one of the hard routes in Colorado. He was kind of considered the top Colorado climber. He appears. And then Bill Price pokes his head over the roof. I'm like, oh my God, I'm with all these superstars. And I'm just this punk kid from Madras who's here to try to do this ridiculous climb. I'm really out of my league. I really don't belong. And I was all apologetic. And I'm like, hey guys, look, I'll give it another try. And when I fall, I'll just clean it and you can have it all to yourselves. And actually, Yanero was really cool about it. He's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. That's fine. He'd already done it. He wanted to get Collins on it. And so I was super nervous and I just tied in and I just freaking did it. I just climbed
awesome.
it. Yeah. I think I may have had the rope partly clipped in, so it's kind of probably more technically like a yo-yo ascent or something. I can't remember.
Was it having them there?
I don't know. I think it was having them there, wanting to be being super self-conscious about climbing really well and looking good.
Yeah.
And also probably a lot of adrenaline pumping at the time.
Sure.
And like I said, I was a pretty strong climber then. I just didn't realize it because we didn't think we were anywhere near that kind of grade.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I'm just like, holy shit, did I just pull that off? And Bill Price comes over and shakes my hand, and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And then I remember going back and telling Alan, I'm like, we're not that bad. We are not that far off from those guys.
Oh, that's cool.
Because Alan at that time, I think, was climbing better than me. I mean, I think he was getting stronger. Maybe not in 79, but certainly in the 80s. But I'm just like, because we had, as he said, we had this huge inferiority complex. We were just these punks in this crappy little place in Central Oregon. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's face it, there aren't that many climbs, and Yosemite is Mecca.
Yeah.
And these are the priests, basically, of Mecca. And so when I did that thing, I came back and I'm like, we're not that far behind. But then I think people asked me my name, I'm sure. I just said, oh, yeah, we're from Oregon. And then everybody just assumed when they started hearing about Alan 2 or 3 years later, everybody just assumed it was Alan who'd done that. it was me.
How many climbers near the top could be coming out of Madras?
Yeah, I know. I know. It's pretty funny.
So separate reality, that's 12A, like the quintessential.
It was at that time. The lip fell off. The flip fell off.
Mm.
And then I think for a while it was 11D. Maybe they're calling it 12A now again.
Okay, yeah.
But it was a little harder back in those days because I think there's another 3 feet to the lip or something.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it actually literally fell off like 2 winters later.
Wow.
Yeah, a little freeze thaw there knocked it off.
Do you remember you said you weren't that far off. What was the standard at that time in Yosemite?
512.
Yeah.
I mean, there might have been some 12Cs or something like that. I don't know if the Phoenix had been done just yet. Mm-hmm. I think that was one of the early 512s that Jardine had done. Mm-hmm. But that was definitely, there weren't any 513s at that time.
Cool.
As far as I know.
Yeah.
And so at that time, certainly in 79, that was the top level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So in prep for this, I reached out to Alan to ask him if there's anything I should ask you about. And he didn't really have any, I was kind of hoping for a embarrassing story or something. He didn't really have anything.
I'm sure he has plenty.
But he shot me this message back, and I thought I would read it.
Okay.
He wrote, Bill had a tremendous impact on my climbing. He was the single most important person I ever met in my climbing career. Without him, I wouldn't have done much, but to some degree, I had an influence on him as well. We both fed off each other's energy. It clicked with both of us in a way not possible on our own.
That's very kind of him to say that. I certainly agree with him that we pushed each other, but I think he's probably giving me a little too much credit. He was pretty damn driven and pretty damn motivated. Uh-huh. Whereas from my perspective, I learned to climb with my father. I'd done some things, but basically then in terms of the level of climbing we were doing at Smith, he taught me all of that. He took me out. He showed me how to place hexes and, basically the ropes. And so he's the one who really, really pretty much got me fully into climbing once I started going out to Smith on a regular basis. So the influence on me has been tremendous. He's just one of these people that I feel so lucky to have known and to been climbing with him at that time and to play whatever role I could play in terms of pushing him a little bit. But he's a pretty self-motivating individual. He did everything. Let's face it, the reality is he's the one who really changed the game, changed the nature of the sport. And he did all that after I left. So he's being generous there, basically. But I do feel really like that's a very, very interesting and fortunate and lucky relationship that he and I had. And I still consider him one of my best friends. But the kind of combination where Chris Jones and Alan Lester, we all sort of came together at the same time. And it was just one of those unique times when just the right people coming together. I think you could say the same thing maybe about Joe Kinder and Dave Graham and Luke Parody in New England. You're like, what happened? All this, that all these three just had the same drive and they pushed each other in the same way. That happens every now and then in climbing, and it certainly happened in Oregon at that time, and it did kind of change the nature of the sport. And so I just feel really, really fortunate that I was a part of that.
It is so interesting to see what Alan did at Smith and then what you did at the Red, and
right.
how parallel and yet different those two paths have been.
Right, exactly. I mean, I feel a little bit kind of like Forrest Gump. I mean, I've been there at many historical moments. I was there when Katie Brown onsite at Omaha Beach, and I started climbing with Alex Holland in 2005. He and I did the Moonlight Buttress together.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so
awesome.
I've been lucky that my path has kind of gone through in such a way where I've met all these great people like Todd Skinner and John Backer and these folks and everybody like that. So I just feel lucky that it's been this amazing journey and it's had all these interesting twists and turns in all these different areas over the years. So yeah, I've been very fortunate.
Well, Alan really wants to get the three of us together.
Oh, that'd be awesome. That'd be really fun. That'd be really good. And
I told him
then we can tell stories about each other.
I try not to botch this, so I maximize the chances.
Oh, that'd be great.
That
I'd really enjoy that. That'd
awesome.
be fun.
I'll have to stay in touch and make sure I
great. Very
drive
good.
up to Oregon whenever you're going to be up there next. So
that'd be great.
Awesome. We'll make it happen. Well, thanks so much.
Very much. I very much enjoyed chatting. It's been really fun.
It's been super fun to be here.
Yeah, and I hope you're enjoying your time here.
For the rock to dry out.
Yeah.
But I feel very welcomed. And
I think I think we said the other night, like, this is a good climbing community here too.
It's cool.
A group of people here. So
it is. It really
like
is. I feel that.
Yeah.
So,
nice. Awesome. Right. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Cheers.
Very good.
Move with the rhythm. Shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. Sing 1, 2, 3, 4. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.